Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. So, last Friday was May 9th. It was Victory Day. And once a solemn tribute to Soviet Union's sacrifice in World War II, this holiday is now being twisted and reframed. Given the current geopolitical climate in many countries, even celebrations can be banned or are definitely frowned upon. In Moscow, it's a stage for China and the global South. In Washington, Trump is spinning it as an all-American triumph. And in Armenia, state TV is now questioning the country's wartime legacy, downplaying its sacrifices and rewriting its own history. Why? What is behind this sudden revisionism? And who benefits from erasing the truth? That's what we'll be digging into today with Pietro Shakarian, who is a historian of Russia and the Soviet Union, and is currently based in St. Petersburg, Russia. So stay tuned.
Hovik, let's take a moment and thank our listeners for following us. We are always happy to earn your support, folks, and you can do that through our Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee pages, which you can find through podcasts.groong.org/donate. That's where you can go and become a sustaining member. But we know that not everybody can do that, in which case there is another alternative for supporting us. You can comment, you can like, you can share our shows with your friends and colleagues. And as Hovik says, sometimes you can share it with your enemies if you want. We're always happy to earn more listeners and supporters. So everything helps us. You can do that on YouTube. You can do it on Substack, Twitter, and you can also, or X, and you can do that on Facebook. Thank you, and on with the show.
On to the show.
Pietro, welcome to the show.
Asbed, Hovik, it's great to be here. Barev. It's always a pleasure. It's always a thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Добро пожаловать.
Большое спасибо. No, it's a great pleasure to be on your show as always, and I look forward to talking about many important topics on our program today.
It's great to have you on board. It's always fun to talk
absolutely.
with you.
Always fun.
So Pietro, Victory Day in Moscow this year wasn't just a military parade. It was primetime television and geopolitical action. With Xi Jinping as the guest of honor, China's expanding influence took center stage. Despite pressures from the EU, some European leaders attended as well. But the drama associated with Eurocrats trying to prevent Fico and Vucic was a topic for a lot of programs out there. Meanwhile, in the US, Trump is pushing to reframe the Allied victory as a distinctly American accomplishment in World War II. Can you give us your impressions of May 9, both the parade and the geopolitics around it?
Well, first of all, May 9th for the Russians is, and not only for the Russians, I mean, for most people in the former Soviet Union, but, at the core, the Russians, it is a sacred holiday. And this is the 80th anniversary. So there's added significance to this. I mean, you have to think the sacrifice of the Soviet Union in World War II, 26 to 27 million people were killed. Soviet citizens were killed in the war. That's an enormous sacrifice. It's a sacrifice that we can't even comprehend in terms of the West. So this is enormous. And then in addition to that, it's also geopolitically very important because you see the position of Xi at this event, on that he and Putin are getting together. There was this kind of like synergy between China and Russia, and that really tells you quite a bit about where the world is going, where the West has really kind of pushed the situation, right? So Russia and China are now closer together than they've ever been before. And also, the other thing that struck me about this is that, this was really kind of a celebration of the rest versus the West. Again, I talk about the rise of the rest versus the West. The West was virtually absent, right? The only two EU or European leaders there, aside from, of course, Vladimir Putin, because Russia's also a European country. The only two European leaders there were Vucic and Fico. That's all. Nobody else. No, Macron, no Starmer, no Merz, no Kaya Kalas, thank God, Kaya Kalas was not there. I mean, that would be too much, actually. But she was the guest of honor at this event, and this was all. There were also concerns that Ukraine was going to be, that the Ukrainians might disrupt the proceedings. There were, of course, Ukrainian drone attacks, threats to Russia from Ukraine. There was even at the very beginning of the parade, you even saw Maduro clasping his hands almost prayer-like, as if to be praying that hopefully, nothing goes wrong here. But the weather was excellent. It was an enormously successful event. And again, it highlighted where things are today. And at the end of the parade, Putin met also, I should mention, with North Korean troops. There were contingents from various foreign countries there, I should also mention. Plus, also, Putin met with veterans of the war, including Armenian veterans of the Great Patriotic War. So, yeah, absolutely, it was an enormously successful event.
Yeah. I mean, if I could just comment on the battle over historical narratives, I think that is disappointing that, it has come to this, but wars can be wars, geopolitics can be geopolitics, but changing the truth. I mean, we Armenians are the last 5 years have experienced that on our own skin, but I always attributed that to we're a small country. It's easier to overpower and silence us and brainwash us. But it seems to be like this changing of the narratives of what happened is happening at such a grand scale that I can't even fathom how that's gonna turn out.
Well, also you have to think about it like this, that World War II, I mean, the Great Patriotic War was enormously significant for the Armenians. So I mentioned about the 27 million Soviet citizens who died in the war, right? It's 26 to 27 million. Now that's about, to get this, just think about this. This is 14% of the pre-war Soviet population. That's enormous, right? You have whole, classes of people, they might have been graduating from school who went off and died in the war. It was an incredible sacrifice of the Soviet people. They even had something called Ivan's widows. There were so many women who were widowed as a result of the war, right?
Yeah.
But 14% of the pre-war Soviet population, if you go by republic, it's like 25% if we talk about the Slavic republics. Because again, for the Soviet Union, this was a war of survival. If you look at Hitler's Mein Kampf, if you look at his ideology of Lebensraum, the idea was to exterminate the Slavic peoples. The Slav is the slave. So in addition to killing 6 million Jews, there was also this very strong genocidal intent against the Slavic people. So
well, I mean,
in Belarus, I just want to break this down for you, Hovik, because this is really important. In Belarus, 25% of the pre-war population died. In Ukraine, 16% of the pre-war population died. In Russia, 13% of the pre-war population died. Now, the interesting statistic is that in Armenia, 14% of the pre-war population died, and Armenia was not even part of the active theater of hostilities. The Armenian Republic punched above its weight in terms of its contribution to the Soviet victory in the war. And also also Artsakh, actually people from Artsakh, enormous contribution to the victory. So yeah.
Well, yeah, so definitely there's a lot to talk about, and we're going to dive into all those details. But let's just talk about the event itself in terms of today's geopolitics. Armenia's approach to Victory Day this year stood in stark contrast to Azerbaijan's. While Nikol Pashinyan attended the Moscow events without a military contingent, Ilham Aliyev skipped the parade. That's interesting in and of itself. But Azerbaijan did send its own troops to participate in the parade. And I guess, does this underscore some kind of the shifting geopolitical dynamics? I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Why did Pashinyan decline to send troops, and what message did he intend to send with that?
It's a really interesting scenario because, again, you have a national leader who didn't attend, but his troops came. And then you have a national leader who did attend, but his troops didn't. He didn't send, a military contingent with him. I think that first and foremost, even independent of what message is trying to be sent to Moscow from Baku or Yerevan, it also, in my point of view, indicates kind of the shifting balance that Pashinyan has not focused on developing Armenia's defenses. Armenia is in a much weaker position as a result of his administration, shall we say, or his regime, as I like to call it. And whereas Aliyev is eager to show off his military prowess, that this is our, our great success. Plus, also you have to understand too that those Azeri troops who were on display there, those were Azeri commandos who were trained by Turkey. They were trained by NATO, actually, as a matter of fact.
So it was funny. I should mention this because during World War II, the main people from Azerbaijan or the territory of Azerbaijan who actually participated are Armenians from Artsakh, from Karabakh, had a punched above their weight inside Azerbaijan itself, and they had a much, look at the number of generals we gave and so forth. And so for Aliyev to take credit and with Turkish trained troops and NATO trained troops is a little bit I don't know, surreal, paradoxical.
And also, not only that, I mean, that's not even counting the fact that he's actively tearing down monuments to our heroes in Artsakh, Aliyev. I mean, this is what he's doing. But apparently, also, you have to think, too, Pashinyan apparently has no problem with that. In addition to recognizing Artsakh as part of Azerbaijan, he has not uttered one word of protest of the desecration of the monuments of Armenian heroes from Artsakh in Artsakh itself by the Azerbaijani authorities. He has not said one thing about that, unsurprisingly, shall we say. But yeah, no, but I think also the other thing too is first of all with Pashinyan, so he's not sending troops, but at the same time he's going, which is kind of interesting because it also indicates that at some point the effort of Armenia to pivot west, his grand idea for Armenia to join EU, has more or less failed. It's kind of an admission that it has more or less failed, but he doesn't want to fully admit it. So he himself is going, but he's not sending any contingent of troops to kind of augment, I guess you could say that message. Whereas Azerbaijan, it's interesting because it still shows that no matter what kind of overtures the Russians try to make toward Aliyev or toward Baku, that at the end of the day, Baku feels no loyalty to Russia. At the end of the day, they're basically saying, well, you know what, screw you, we can do what we want. And even Aliyev, you have to think, I mean, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he attended Victory Day in Moscow 10 years ago in 2015. So it's not unprecedented. It's not like as if his father's birthday is so big that he has to do it every year.
It's not like they didn't know the birthday was coming up. They announced that he was going. And then suddenly he says, "Oh, I gotta, my father's birthday. I forgot about it."
So, well, I think the original excuse, Hovik, was to use Benjamin Netanyahu's visit as the reason for not going. And then when Netanyahu did not come to Baku, then he had to think of something else. And that's why I think that his father came in handy. Let's say at that point. Although again, this was like I think the 102nd. Birthday of Heydar Aliyev, so it wasn't even that significant of a birthday. It wasn't like 105 or 110 or something, like a magical number even. It was just it was a lame excuse, and I'm sure the Russians took note of that. But yeah.
But what do you attribute that to? I mean, there must be a reason because he wouldn't cancel it out of the blue, right? I mean, last minute.
Also, I think that, I think it's just that he doesn't respect them. He doesn't respect the Russians. But I think it's also kind of stupid because really, the Russians are emerging from this whole Ukrainian war as being, one of the top, if not the top military forces in the world. So if Azerbaijan really, if they think of themselves as a great military force, right, a rising middle power, or, the power center in the Caucasus, they like to stress this, right? Wouldn't they want to know what the most advanced military in the world is doing, what the technology is that they're going to have on display, so on and so forth. Unless Aliyev really believes NATO is the future, unless he still is trapped in this, just like Pashinyan, by the way, this idea that somehow the West is the future, that Kaya Kalas, and that, I don't know, von der Leyen, and that Starmer, and Trump and all our favorite people, that's the future, right? And we smile about this because we think, that this is completely ridiculous. But it is very, very possible that Aliyev and his crew, you look at somebody like Hajiyev, who went to the NATO War College. He studied at the NATO War College. They believe still in that this is, I guess you could say, the unipolar American moment. They're still kind of, stuck in this, belief. And so it has not yet set in the ramifications of what's going on in Ukraine and what it means for the region. And I think
in
he
general,
really believes
though,
that,
Pietro,
that he's
I think
stronger than,
the Turks have been very good at hedging their bets rather than betting on one horse or the other one. Witness their stance in both world wars, where they started off
absolutely.
with the wrong side and they lost, and then they turned coated and they went to the winning side.
No, I agree with you, Asbed, and we're gonna, I think, go to that point shortly with regard to some other issues.
So let's start going in that direction. Inside Armenia, there is also historic revisionism happening. On May 9, Armenia's public TV aired a primetime interview with Artsrun Hovhannisyan, the guy from Hakhteluem fame, who lied to the Armenian public for 44 days during the Artsakh war. He was essentially calling for a reassessment of the World War II legacy for modern Armenia. And this comes amid broader efforts to downplay and Armenia's significant contributions to the Soviet war effort, from key military leaders to entire divisions that played critical roles in major battles. So, as you said, despite not being attacked by the Nazi Germany, Armenia, as you say, contributed mightily, not just in terms of the number of deaths, in terms of sacrifices given, but also recruitment. I mean, I was amazed to see that Armenia was the third or fourth highest in terms of per capita soldiers. And it was also high in Artsakh, as we said, but the rest of Azerbaijan was definitely low. Artur Martirosyan was on our podcast earlier today, Monday, and he hinted that these are attempts to diminish the Soviet contributions and essentially recraft, socially engineer a new identity for us. First of all, who is Artsrun Hovhannisyan? I jokingly, before the show, I was calling him Nazi sympathizer, but I think that's a good name for him, Nazi, because in that show, he was actually saying some pretty sympathetic things towards Nazis.
Yeah.
So Artsrun Hovhannisyan, who is he? Tell us more a little,
Well, he is a weapons specialist. I mean, this is what he bills himself as. I mean, that's his I guess his forte. But it is, I think, a disgrace that you have anybody affiliated with the Armenian military trying to praise Nazi Germany or create this kind of revisionist historiography where basically he says that the so-called, he is using this idea of kind of like, I guess, a unified Armenia or something like that. He's talking about both Eastern and Western Armenia, that if Nazi Germany had won the war, then Armenia would be completely liberated. This is his idea, effectively. But this is a gross distortion of the facts because...
So first of all, hold on.
Yeah.
Armenia, we know Eastern Armenia, so Eastern Armenia would be liberated, but he also talked about Western Armenia. So, Nazi Turkey is going to take Western Armenia from its... Nazi Germany is going to take Western Armenia from its ally, Turkey, and give it to Armenians for what? For our beautiful eyes or what?
No, and I think actually, I mean, you hit on an important point there when you call it Nazi Turkey, because Turkey was extremely sympathetic with the Nazis, and actually, not only that, that was a very, that love was reciprocated because Hitler loved Ataturk. Hitler had the famous line, on the eve of the war, "Who now remembers the Armenians?" Right? So we kind of took some inspiration from what the Young Turks did to the Armenians in 1915, as he was preparing his own kind of genocidal plans against Jews and Slavs and others. And, Hitler was a huge fan of Turkey, and Turkey, returned that love. I mean, that they were planning, this is what the documentary evidence shows us, that they were planning to attack the Soviet Union in the south, in the area of Eastern Armenia, if the Soviets lost the Battle of Stalingrad. which would mean the complete extinction, the finishing of what happened in 1915. So this idea that somehow Turkey would be so magnanimous as to give Armenia, Western Armenia, because they love Armenians so much, it's complete hogwash. It's complete distortion. It's complete, just like, Artsrun Hovhannisyan, his specialty is lying. This is complete lies. And also the other thing I think is really funny and really ridiculous is how that, let's say this might have been some idea from the top to introduce a revisionist history of World War II in Armenia. Why would you take the guy with the least credibility to advance your argument? The guy that was lying to the people for 44 days. There's no way. I mean, how would that help? And also, it completely contradicts the archival record. I'm an archival historian. I've worked with materials on Soviet Armenia. I wrote a whole book on Soviet Armenia, effectively, with Anastas Mikoyan. And I can tell you that this guy is not serious. He knows nothing about history or historiography or anything. So
and apparently also, so after the 44-day war, he was appointed for his good work, as a reward for his good work by, I guess he's some kind of a leadership position at the Vazgen Military Academy, essentially training some of our future soldiers, which is,
oh my God,
frightening. So, I mean, it is a...
What I'm actually concerned, Hovik, is that they might rename the Vazgen Sargsyan Academy to the Aram Sargsyan Academy. I mean, that's where they're going. I mean, with this, I mean, that's how I see it. But also, I want to address something else. The Victory Day in Armenia, at the core, is the victory in the Great Patriotic War, World War II. But also, we have, the liberation of Shushi, the establishment of the Artsakh Defense Forces. And also, you have to think about what this also means, because Artsakh gave so much to the war. So much of the great Armenian heroes from the war they had roots in Artsakh. So like Hudyakov or Nelson Stepanyan, or even if you think about the greater Artsakh, I mean, you have, roots from Ganzak, so you should know that Marshal Bagramian, himself has those roots, right? And when we look at this history, Artsakh, the special role of Artsakh in the Great Patriotic War was augmented by the Shushi liberation and was augmented by the establishment of the Artsakh Defense Forces. So really, when we talk about Victory Day for Armenians, what does it mean? Victory Day for Armenians demonstrates what Armenians are capable of accomplishing as a united nation, especially in military terms. It's a date of enormous pride for Armenians. It's about the self-confidence of the Armenians. Now, ask yourself this. Why would somebody want to undermine that? Why would somebody not want to talk about moments of Armenian pride or moments of Armenian self-confidence, or really kind of put a wet blanket on, efforts for Armenians to be confident about themselves? I should also mention this, that there are also new narratives among kind of liberal Armenians and NGO-niks in Hayastan, who want to frame this as, well, the Great Patriotic War, yes, it was previously a day of pride and celebration, but now it's a time of mourning, this kind of a thing, because we lost Artsakh and so on and so forth. And, well, we thought we were something, but now I guess we're not, and so on and so forth. But no, the Victory Day is not only a celebration of past glories, it also shows what we are capable of and what we can accomplish in the future. Now, again, to rewrite that history, I think is to really undermine Armenian national self-confidence. And that's when I get to the question, why would anybody in the Armenian government want to undermine Armenian national self-confidence? Hovik, what do you think?
We know why they're doing it. They're effectively a Turkish occupying force. That's why they're doing it. But I don't believe that they'll be successful. But even if they chip away at it, like, piece by piece, it has an effect.
Well, I think that the idea is that it would accompany the purposeful weakening of Armenia and Armenia's defenses and defensive forces. So when we see what has happened to Armenia, especially since 2020, I guess you could say, kind of neutralize Armenia, at the behest of Turkey and Azerbaijan, that this is the ideological component of that. So there was the weakening in terms of the hard defenses of Armenia, of its military might, its military strength, the arrest of its top military commanders, before the war in Artsakh. People don't talk about that. You have to think also, again, famously before the so-called Velvet Revolution, Serge was actually preparing for a military modernization of Armenia, right? He had a big kind of program that he was planning, and this program was never implemented conveniently. But to undermine the narrative of the Great Patriotic War in Armenia, to undermine the narrative of Victory Day, of Armenian military achievements, it's done with a very purposeful intention of, that would be like, I guess you could say, again, the ideological element of, the weakening of Armenia. But I don't think, like you say, I don't think they'll succeed. And actually, already this year, we can see in Armenia that despite their best efforts, the Victory Day still was widely marked, widely celebrated. There was the Immortal Regiment in Armenia, right? That actually, this is something that originated from the Russian city of Tomsk as kind of a completely grassroots thing. This is not something that came from Putin or the Russian government or anything like that. And so what, for our listeners, again, I have to emphasize this, that when we talk about the Second World War in the Soviet context, contrary to what Trump has said, it was not the U.S. I mean, the U.S., of course, the major U.S. role in the war was in the Pacific, but the U.S. did not single-handedly win World War II, and they certainly didn't win it single-handedly in Europe. That it was the Soviet Union that won the war in Europe, right? And so the sacrifice was so immense that people, even to this day, want to preserve the memory of their forebears who participated in the war. So what happened in the city of Tomsk is people basically, they organized a rally where they took signs with the images of their family members who participated in the war, and they marched with them. And then eventually this spread to other Russian cities. It spread to other former Soviet republics, including Armenia. And now it's become a major international event. So in Yerevan, there was a very impressive showing, actually, of this Immortal Regiment, despite the efforts to rewrite the history. So, yeah.
So I should mention that little Armenia, besides punching above its weight in terms of manpower, also contributed greatly to the leadership of the USSR's armed forces. I mean, we had tons of generals, but besides that, we had three marshals. So Hovhannes Bagramyan, Hamazas Babajanyan, and Sergei Khudyakov, whose Armenian name is Armenak Khanperyans. And I mean, they eventually became marshals. Some may have become after the war, but they were definitely in the high leadership. And then also Ivan Isakov, after whom, I mean, after all these people, there are streets named in Yerevan, but the U.S. Embassy is based on on Isakov Street, I believe, in Yerevan. His Armenian name is Hovannes der Isahakyan, so he had to change it, or he decided to change it. But he became an admiral. I mean, just imagine little Armenia contributing so much to the leadership of the Soviet Union armed forces.
Also espionage too, because if we look at Gohar and Gevorg Vartanyan, they actually they thwarted a Nazi assassination attempt against the Big Three in Tehran, right? So there's also that element too. Plus also Mikoyan, the Mikoyan family, the Artyom Mikoyan. We talk about his work with designing the famous MiG fighter. You also, Anastas Mikoyan helped with supply at the front, but also his son, Vladimir Mikoyan, died in the Battle of Stalingrad. And that's not even counting the 89th Tamanyan Division. There's so much we could talk about with this.
Yeah,
and also
there's Berlin, and there's this famous video of them dancing the Kochari in Berlin. So,
and also the Sadarabat, I want to also say this, that when we talk about Bagramyan, there's the connection even with the First Republic. So we talk about the Sadarabat battle in 1918, which basically ensured the physical existence of the Armenian people. That This was a battle that Bagramian actually participated in. So this is a history that absolutely must be preserved. People should not be, whitewashing it or distorting it or anything.
So Hovik, I think when Pietro was mentioning that the Armenian nation actually gave 14% of casualties from its pre-war population, I was thinking that 1 in 7 people died, and every family experienced loss. I know that your family also did. Do you want to talk about that?
Not my family directly, but definitely, yes, I do want to talk about my wife's great uncle. His name was Gevorg Kolozyan. I've been around their family so much that it feels personal to me too. He was just a young man from Nurbayazet. Today it's called Gavar in Armenia. And he went to the war and was captured by the Germans. But he didn't stay a prisoner for long. He escaped and joined the Italian resistance, fighting alongside the Garibaldi Brigade. That was one of the resistance brigades in Italy. If you want to know more about him, we'll have the links in the show notes. But he essentially led missions to capture German soldiers, sabotage supply lines, and even after being wounded, he kept fighting until the end, and he was awarded for that by the Italian government. Today, he is buried in the cemetery of Radicondoli, which is a small town in Tuscany, and it's pretty far from the small Armenian town where he grew up. And I'm not sure if any of his family members have gotten the chance to visit this place, but yeah, and definitely next time I'm in Tuscany, I'll be definitely going to Radicondoli. And if anyone's listening to us from there, maybe you could visit and take a picture of the gravesite. We would really appreciate it.
One thing I also want to just kind of add to what Hovik said is we also should remember, and we talk about the Allied war effort, that there were Armenians also, certainly in the American army. There were Armenians in the French Resistance. So again, the Armenians contributed massively to this major victory against a major evil in human history. That's something alone that we should be marking. But again, the fact that, I also think it's important to emphasize this. The fact that Artsakh played such a big role in this has to be absolutely underscored. That to diminish the memory of the Armenian sacrifice is bad enough, but to diminish specifically the role of Artsakh, I think is unconscionable, absolutely. There's kind of like a purposeful memory loss, as I see it, unfortunately. And Armenians should not, they should not accept a kind of a crude revision of their national history, especially when it concerns their national pride, their national achievements, and a reflection of what they can accomplish as a united nation against major external threats.
And in fact, we are talking about World War II, but this definitely extends to the memory of the Armenian genocide, which the same government is trying to downplay and revise as well. So yeah, I definitely concur with that, Pietro, and thank you for talking to us about this topic.
Absolutely. Anytime you guys need me to talk about this is a topic that absolutely needs to be emphasized, and the memory of the war in Armenia and the memory of Armenian, military heroes absolutely should not be, whitewashed or forgotten, just like the memory of the genocide should not be whitewashed or forgotten, or even this idea of Armenia's connection with its old historical past. When I hear things like, that today's Armenia has no relation to the historical Armenia, I think that it's frankly, it's disgusting that we even have such leaders, quote unquote, who say such things. And so hopefully it will change. Hopefully it will absolutely, and hopefully it will change soon. That's all I have to say.
So before we go, I think it's important to highlight, we're not trying to push one side or the other. World War II was truly an immense loss on all countries, and the victory was also a shared victory. It's important to remember and recognize the fact that U.S. supplies, Lend-Lease, and all those contributions that the United States and other countries have provided towards the war. But what could you say about this, Pietro? I mean, it's we don't want to take sides here, but in the end, 27 million people from USSR died. So
which is huge. I mean, the U.S. by comparison is like 300,000, I believe. So that loss is absolutely enormous. That's not even counting also the contribution, let's say, of the Chinese. So we see Xi there with Putin. Think about how the Chinese, Hovik, suffered under the Japanese. I mean, I don't need to go into all the atrocities. It was absolutely brutal. And so the Chinese too, when Putin in his speech mentioned about the sacrifice of the Chinese, that was a huge thing to stress. Absolutely, China and Russia. And also, you have to think the other thing too. I just want to mention quickly about Xi and Putin, that they were on the sidelines, really, really intensive discussions, and Xi was smiling, which meant that he really liked what he was seeing there, on Victory Day in Moscow. But it was a historic Victory Day, especially in terms of what it represented between Russia and China, like I said, and their synergy. But kind of going back to this idea of that America won World War II, of course, the latest person to emphasize this point has been the U.S. President, Donald J. Trump, who has again stressed that we were the ones who did all the heavy lifting. Well, of course, again, it's an allied effort. But I also want to stress that this is not just Trump who's saying this. I mean, there has long been in the American culture this idea of that we won World War II, that it was all us, and so on and so forth. It's the kind of the Hollywood version of events, right? The Saving Private Ryan version of events, that we were the ones who won the war effectively. Well, of course, the U.S. did, the U.S. did have a major contribution to the war, especially when we look at the Pacific Theater. In fact, the Pacific Theater for most Americans is even more important than the European theater, actually. And even my own, on my maternal side, my own grandfather was in the war, as a matter of fact. So everybody knows how important the Pacific Theater is to World War II. But from the American point of view, but America did not win the war single-handedly. This is part again of this kind of national mythology, and Americans didn't used to think this way. By the way, if you go back to look at the newspapers in the 40s, if you look at I don't know, if you look at the New York Times, if you look at what's being reported in Los Angeles or in Cleveland or Chicago or any of these cities, they were reporting actively on the Eastern Front. That at the time in the 40s. Americans recognized that the Russians, the Soviets, that they were the ones doing, that they were the ones sacrificing massively in the war in Europe. So that was actually acknowledged at that time. But then because of the Cold War geopolitics, and now today we have our kind of new Cold War geopolitics, that's not so convenient to talk about. But in those days, in the 40s, that was a readily acknowledged fact.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's again, I fully respect the contributions of everyone, but it would be a denial of my own past. And as an Armenian, if I engage in historic revisionism myself, and I think that, one thing that I would advocate to our listeners is to, be mindful of that when you hear media reports about the contributions of one country. I mean, no single country, I would say, was decisive. They were all, it was truly an allied victory.
Yeah, and also think about the long-term political impact too. I mean, the foundation of the United Nations, as imperfect as that is, at least we have something. At least we have some basis for, I guess, attempting to enforce international law. So absolutely, I think that, when we think about the war and think about the impact, it was enormous, even to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pietro, you mentioned that she was having a very good time at the Victory Parade and in Moscow. What did you think of Nikol Pashinyan?
Nikol Pashinyan, it was interesting because he kind of seemed like he was out of it. He seemed like he wasn't there. I mean, physically he was there, but mentally he wasn't there. There was actually some controversy because there was a moment, I believe, when the Azerbaijani contingent, came by, and it looked like he was like pleased with what he saw, which was kind of, interesting that an Armenian leader who didn't even invite an Armenian contingent was kind of pleased to see what Aliyev had brought, even though Aliyev himself was not there. But he just was not with it, as far as I could observe. And it was interesting that he was seated next to Lukashenko, by the way, because Lukashenko doesn't exactly have the highest opinion of Nikol Pashinyan.
That was very funny, by the way.
Yeah, and actually, when you look at the pictures, he looked like he was like isolated.
Yeah.
So you would see Putin talking with Lukashenko, and in Pashinyan looked like
he looked isolated. And he looked on the other side of a guy who was double his size, and
I know.
He just
absolutely.
looked. Hovik, what do you think?
I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't so sad that the Armenian leader is the one that we're talking about. But what can we say?
One redeeming fact is that he actually came. That the 80th anniversary of the Great Patriotic War is not an anniversary that happens all the time. This is, especially because the veterans are no longer going to be there after some point. I mean, that we're having fewer, with each passing anniversary, there are fewer and fewer veterans who are witnessing it. The 80th anniversary is enormously important. And the fact that we had Armenian veterans there, that I thought was immensely significant. And the fact that the Armenian leader showed up, even though he's not our favorite Armenian leader, and he's not, by any stretch of the imagination, a great Armenian leader, still Armenia was represented, which I think was rather important.
Thank you, Pietro, for coming on the show and putting all this in context of history. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Asbed. Thank you, Hovik. It's a pleasure, as always, to join you on your program.
Okay, well, that's our show today. This episode was recorded on May 13, 2025. We have been talking with Dr. Pietro Shakarian, who is a historian of Russia and the Soviet Union and a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Historical Research at the National Research University Higher School of Economics in St. Petersburg, Russia. For more information on all of us in this episode, check out our show notes, podcasts.groong.org/episode number. Hovik is also going to put his information and pictures of his family who have participated in the World War.
Well, thank you for listening, folks. Don't forget to like, share, comment on our content to help us reach more people. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.